Hi, my name is Bill Nones. I'm a whip maker. I've got a YouTube channel. It's my name, Bill Nones, and on that YouTube channel you can check out any of my whip making videos. But coming up is a video where I make for Tandy Leather a whip just like this, a deerskin bullwhip, and you can learn how to make it too. So the first step is to construct the core of the whip. It's essentially the heart of the whip, and we're going to do that by wet molding a piece of, this is a 3.5 ounce scrap of veg tan cowhide. The core is going to be 16 inches long, and so what we want to do first is get a long strip that's tapered from a point out to 3 inches, 2 3/4 inches to 3 inches wide at the widest. And then we're going to get it completely saturated with water. And now what we do is I'll just take the edge and begin to fold it slightly. You need to fold it so that you've got something that you can push on when you're trying to roll. And I'll begin at the widest section and roll a little bit. I'll go forward and back a bit until I feel it tighten up nice, and then I'll move down, and I'll do this the entire way down. Once I've got a pretty decent start, I'll just begin rolling it. And when you start to roll it, you've got to maintain the same direction every time you roll. You'll feel it tighten up, and at first it's going to seem like it's not holding shape. Every time you roll, it's going to squeeze some of the water out and accelerate the drying time a bit. It helps sometimes to put a absorbent material on the table to suck up some of the water. The wetter that it is when you're done rolling, the longer it'll take to dry and take its permanent shape. And it'll get to a point where the core of it is relatively tight, and then you can just sort of twist it to the point where it won't twist anymore, and then you know you've got it really solid. And then I'll usually take this end and clamp it in a vise, and then take this end. Once this is clamped and secured in a vise, I'll just twist this and sometimes staple it to the tabletop or put a weight on it and leave it overnight. Allow all the water to evaporate and allow the leather to wet mold into this cone shape, and this is what's going to act as the core of the whip and is going to define the very beginning of the taper of the whip. So we've let the core dry, all the water has evaporated out, and as you can see, the leather has retained this cone shape. If you're pressed for time and you want to have this dry out and take this permanent shape faster than overnight, you can use a hairdryer on a low setting and just blow dry it until most of the moisture has evaporated. As long as the leather dries while it's stuck in that shape, it will retain the shape. Here is our leather core. We're going to attach that to this metal rod. So this is about 8.5 inches long. With deerskin, we're not going to shot load this whip. It's going to be naturally weighted. So we want to put as much weight as we can into the handle. You can use thinner rods in this. This rod is 9.4 millimeters wide. It's a bit heavier than a thinner rod, obviously, but if you can purchase rods like this at any sort of metal supply store, but you want to ensure that you're getting cold rolled steel. If you can find spring steel, that's preferred, because the last thing you want to have happen is to have this handle bend, but a rod that thick is not going to bend. So we want to attach the core, the leather core, to the metal portion of the core. But we need to ensure that we have a strong transition there so that this doesn't wear out over time. So the way that I do that is I'll get this scrap cowhide and I'm just going to cut a piece. That is wide enough to completely cover it without overlapping, and is long enough to attach to the handle with enough material and to the core with enough material to prevent it from coming loose. I'll take a safety beveler and I'm just going to skive this down, because what we want to have is the thinnest material that we can so that we're maintaining the slimmest profile without any major bumps. So now we're going to use this leather we just skived down to attach the leather portion of the core to the metal portion. To do that, first we're going to use contact cement. I've already applied the contact cement to this edge of the leather. I'm now going to put it on the handle, and with this contact cement, the best way to apply it is to apply it to both pieces that you're going to be coupling together, and then allow each piece to breathe a bit. Let the air begin to tack up the contact cement. If I were to put this in here now while both were very wet, it wouldn't stick. So I give it about a minute or so, let each item become tacky, and then I'll connect them together. I'm just going to wrap them around and hold this in place, let it sort of all stick together. And then I'm going to take a bit of artificial sinew here, not too much. I just want to secure that while I apply the cement to the leather portion of the core. And I'm just going to wrap it around here a couple of times just to hold it in place. And now I'm going to repeat the same action with the leather portion of the core. We've got sufficient tack. I'm going to now butt the end of the leather portion of the core up to the end of the metal core. Try to get them as close together as possible and try to keep them on the same plane. We don't want the leather core sitting higher or lower than the metal. And then I'm going to wrap that around. I'm going to use this sinew to hold it in place. We want the tack to dry the whole way down, so I'm not going to do an edge-to-edge wrap, but just enough of a wrap to get all areas that need to stick together touching. And once this has fully dried, I'm going to trim up the edges of the leather strip that's coupling these two pieces together so that it all lays flush. So we don't want any leather to overlap like that, so I'm just going to try and make these edges, these pieces meet edge to edge. And one way I'll do that is just I'll snip like this and cut the part that is too large. This gives me an idea of where. And for more precise work, I'll get my safety beveler out and just flatten that down. Doesn't matter if you cut through the sinew at this point because the cement is holding it together, but now we're going to pull a large piece of sinew off and bind the whole area we just contact cemented to keep it strong. Now when I've reached back to where we began binding, I'm going to go onto the metal a bit. And then I'm going to take one of these pieces of scrap. I'm going to make a U shape with it. Place the U shape onto the metal handle, and now I'm going to wrap over that 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Then I'm going to take the end, stick it through the eye formed. pull this through. And then just a hard metal board. Just roll this a bit, smoothing it out. And the core for the bullwhip is complete. So we'll be making this bullwhip out of deerskin, and when I started making bullwhips, I wanted to transition into leather, and you'll see a lot of people using kangaroo hide. But kangaroo hide is tough to source when you're in the United States, and the only alternative in most people's minds is cowhide, but a great alternative is deerskin. And so what we have in front of me here are two deerskin hides, a black economy hide and a white snow white hide. These are the two hides I'm going to be using to build this bullwhip. The reason kangaroo is preferred is because it has very high tensile strength. It's about 20 times stronger than cowhide in terms of its ability to maintain itself under tension without breaking. Deerskin is about 10 times stronger than cowhide. So you can cut thin strands with deerskin to get fine plaiting for a bullwhip. And while it's not as strong as kangaroo hide, it's certainly strong enough to make a very good bullwhip. And I started off making bullwhips with snow white and economy. We'll use the economy for the interior layers. The reason this is an economy hide is because it has more imperfections in the grain. You'll see these marks here. These are scratches. There'll be more tick marks. There'll be larger holes from the hunting that actually took the animal down. For a hide to not have any tick marks, big hunting holes, scratches, it's rare. You'll have 1 in 20 hides come out of a tannery looking like that. And that's what snow white is. So these are more expensive, but you get a stronger leather, you get a nicer quality leather that's going to be on the outside of the whip that people will see. So one snow white deerskin hide will be used on the last layer of the whip that's visible, and one economy hide will be used for all the internal layers. Any color can be used. I think there's 4 or 5 different colors available. Go to Tandy, find the one that is the largest for the money or has the fewest number of imperfections, and grab a snow white. Okay, so here is our economy deer hide. And what we're gonna do with this is first, we're gonna trim off all of the edges that are unsuitable for cutting strands, and then we're gonna actually strand it. So first, it's helpful to understand how the hide works. This right here is the neck of the deer, and these are the 2 front shoulders. This area along the center is where the spine is, and these areas on the edges where they meet up would be on the belly of the animal. So almost every animal is going to have stretchier leather, weaker leather in the belly area. So we don't want to use this material for stranding. It's going to break, it's going to stretch. It's just not suitable for it. So we'll trim that area off. This is the sweet spot of the deerskin. This is where the strongest leather with the least amount of stretch is going to be. So we're going to trim the area, we're going to strand, and you'll see how strands are cut. But as we cut more and more strands and get more and more of the layers on the whip built, we'll be getting to better and better leather, so that each subsequent layer is going to have stronger and higher quality leather than the layer before it. So the most important thing when trimming deerskin is to have quality shears, and enough cannot be said about that. If you have quality shears, you're just going to cut right through it. Sometimes you don't even have to snip. So I'm just going to start at the neck end. I'm just going to, anything that looks real wrinkly, I'm going to probably take 1.5 inches, maybe 1 inch off. It's going to go around the entire outside edge of this hide. These are the back legs, and these are just very, very weak sections. So you'll feel like you're wasting leather by not using this, but keep in mind, you're only not using it for this whip build. You can find all sorts of other uses for it. So don't be afraid to cut it, because you're not going to be throwing it away. You're just not going to be using it to build a whip. This is what we have trimmed off. Just put that to the side and hang on to it. You'll find reasons to use that. If you're wondering what shears to buy, there are a number of different options. I purchased these at Tandy Leather. They're the craft tool. I think they're the premium shears. There are a number of different shears that you can purchase, but these are the sharpest and the best for trimming hides like deerskin. I've used this on over 200 whip builds, this one set, and it's still as sharp as it was the day I purchased it. I'd highly recommend getting that. There are many different methods to get strands cut, but for somebody who is beginning, there's no better way than to use an Aussie strander. You can, if you want to be bold, try to cut strands by hand, but that's very difficult with deerskin. These are readily accessible, and I've used this on every whip build that I've done. These take Schick injector blades. Can be purchased in either the carbon or stainless steel. I recommend the carbon over the stainless steel. They stay sharper. I think they're available in packs of 10. I purchased a pack of 1,000 because I use quite a few of them. But if you're only going to build one whip, get a pack of 10 and buy more as you need them. Anytime I use a Schick injector blade, when it's a new one, I get a Sharpie or any marker, and I'll mark along the entire edge of the blade. And the reason that I do this is because as I cut through the hide, the Sharpie will wear away. Sometimes it can be difficult to tell if you've used a section of the blade before. Okay, so we're gonna take our Schick injector blade that we have marked the entire edge. The Australian strander is held on your middle finger. Your forefinger is going to sit underneath the shelf so that the strander rests on your forefinger. This large washer here is secured by a screw. You're gonna unscrew that just so the washer is loose. Then you're gonna slip the blade behind the washer and into the first slot on the barrel, which is this brass portion. There's 2 slots cut into it. This first one is where the blade rests, and the second one is at 5 millimeters. It's to give you a reference point of a 5 millimeter wide cut. Now, after about 30 feet, this area will get dull. So all I have to do is unscrew that, move the blade up, and I'm on a new section of the blade. And that's why I use the Sharpie, so that I know what sections of the blade I've already used. And when all the Sharpie is gone, I discard the blade and put a new one in. All right, so we're gonna strand this out. But first I need to figure out how wide I need to cut my strands. I know that this is gonna be a stretchy portion, so I'm gonna wanna cut them wider than what I'm gonna end up needing, because as they stretch, they will narrow. But the quick and easy formula to figure out how wide you need is to figure out the diameter of the thing that you are cutting strands that will be covered by the strands. In this case, it's this core. You take the widest section, it's at 12 millimeters. You take that number, 12, you multiply it by 4.5, so that's 4854. And then you divide that by the number of strands you're gonna use to cover this. We're gonna do a basic 4-strand plait. So we take 54 and divide that by 4, and we're at 13 and a half, 14. So we'll set this at about almost the widest it can go. You just move this wheel up and it's gonna move this fence up or down. Got it at 12 millimeters. That's about the widest we can go, so we may do more than 4 strands. But what's important right now is to strand. So we have the new blade in there. And all you're gonna do is on a stretchier portion of the hide, you're gonna take the blade, and you're just sort of gonna guide it into the deerskin and pull on it so that you get that first cut made. And once that first cut is made, the way that I'll do this is I'll take my ring and pinky finger of my left hand and pinch the hide so that I can keep that section of the hide level with the strander. And I'll just, with my forefinger and thumb, grab the strand portion that's already cut and I'm going to hold that at an angle to the rest of the hide. So you can see a little V forms there between this strand and the hide. You want that angle to be there. And I'm just going to pull with the strander. And I'm going to cut until I've done about 2 laps around the hide. These first 2 laps are going to be composed of leather that I might be able to use for stranding and leather that I likely will not be able to use. And once you get past that portion, almost all of your strands will be usable. But it's good to segregate these strands from what you know is going to be usable strands. And we'll do that by cutting this, stretching it, and whatever breaks during stretching will be discarded. The stretchier the leather, the less consistent your strand width is going to be as you're stranding. So you'll see this strand that I'm cutting isn't the same width the whole way through, but that's because the leather is very stretchy here. Once we get deeper into the hide, maintaining strand width consistency is much more controllable. As difficult as this is the first time you pick up deerskin in a strander, I highly recommend just doing it. I didn't have anyone teach me how to do this, and I used glove leather, which is extraordinarily thin and stretchy. And just don't be afraid of waste. You'll find a use for something that you may have cut improperly for whip making. As long as you don't throw it away, it's not wasted. The only way you're going to get good at it is by doing it. So here we've got our strand cut, and the next thing we're going to do is stretch this out, find the areas that break, discard the shorter strands that break, and keep the ones that don't break, and then continue to strand until we have enough for our first belly. Okay, so to stretch deerskin, most deerskin is going to be chrome tan, so it won't stretch the same way that veg tan leather will, but there is a way to stretch this and maintain the stretch without it going back to its original shape. I'm going to take the strand and dunk it in water, get it completely saturated. So we've got the hook secured on the table. I use this generally on the floor. I'll put my feet on it. It's also what I use to roll, so it's a good way to set up your tool if you're going to have a rolling board and a hook. You're going to take the strand that is now saturated in water. You're going to take the flesh side, which is the fuzzy side, and you're going to have the flesh side in contact with the metal on the hook. And then you're going to wrap it around the hook one time. And now you're just going to secure this end and pull. You'll see water squeeze out of the hide. You want to maintain some tension on the unstretched side. Just don't let slack form there. You don't need to pull very hard with your right hand if you're pulling with your left. You just want to maintain tension. On this first pass of the hide, there should be a lot of breakage. If there isn't, it can be surprising, but that's a good sign. That means if the weakest portion of the hide didn't break while stretching, the strongest portions of the hide likely won't break while stretching as well. Now I'm not pulling with Hulk strength here, pulling with enough tension to replicate the amount of tension I'm going to put on the strands while I'm plaiting them. If it can withstand that amount of force now, I know it will withstand that much when I'm braiding, and it won't break while braiding, which is problematic. If it breaks, I want it to break now so that I know it's bad. So there's our first break. I'm surprised that we've only got one break so far. But like I said, that's a good sign. You can see all the water coming out. That means we're getting a good stretch on it. So now we've got these 3 strands here, and if possible, if you want to find like a chair or a stool and wrap these around the legs of that with tension and let them dry in a tense state. That's going to make it most likely for it to retain its stretched out shape after it dries. Again, this is chrome tanned, So it won't wet mold the same way veg tanned will, but if you let it dry in a tense state, it should maintain that state of tension. Okay, so we've stranded out a fair amount of the economy hide. We're going to use all these strands for each layer of the bullwhip that we braid. We've stretched them out and they're dry now, and you can see the strand width is inconsistent here. We've got wider sections, more narrow sections. Some of this is caused by the stretchiness of the hide as we're stranding it, but a lot of it is also caused in stretching. So you'll gain about 10% on a strand length by stretching, but there are areas that will become more narrow. So we want all the strands to be the same width, so we're going to use this tool here. This is a beveler and resizer. I've got it set on the beveling edge. I'm going to resize all of these strands to the same width, and at the same time we're going to be cutting off each corner of the flesh side so that the strand has a bevel and none of the flesh will squeeze out and poke out when we braid it down nice and tight. So since we're beveling the flesh side, we're going to take the grain side and put that on the beveler. Got my blade set up. Adjust the width with that little finger there. And I'm just going to pick a width that I think we'll be able to get a lot of good coverage out of. And it's a pretty simple process. Just going to pull, let one side of the strand ride along the finger. The other side of the strand is going to hit the blade and get cut at a 45-degree angle, creating the bevel. There are going to be areas that won't be wide enough to actually touch the blade, and there are going to be areas that are much wider than the width between the finger and the blade, but that's fine. What we want to try to do is just get the most consistent strand width that we can. We've done one side there. I'm going to drop this down just a bit so that when I do the other side, I've got more contact with it. So now we've got the other side of this. These chick injector blades are extraordinarily sharp, so it should go without saying, but be very careful, especially on a tool like this where the blade doesn't have a guard. Because you will eventually, if you do it long enough, cut yourself. And if you're going to cut yourself with one of these blades, you're going to cut very deep. So you just want to make sure that you're always mindful of where the blade is. If there's a knot that is inadvertently formed in the strand as you're pulling, it can catch onto your thumb and pull your thumb straight into the blade. So just go slow and easy. So the jagged edge is due to a dulled blade. It will create those teeth when you're beveling. So all that means is we're going to reposition the blade to where there's Sharpie. And I can re-bevel this, but again, this is all going to be used for internal layers of the whip. So aesthetics aren't as important, and this won't affect functionality, but it's a good way to understand how to read when your blade needs to be replaced, because these blades are so sharp that they'll continue to cut, and they'll still continue to cut smoothly and feel like they're smooth, but you don't want areas like that on your overlay where people will see them. Okay, so now we're going to do the first belly of a whip. A belly is simply a layer of leather that consists of strands that have been braided together. It's a round braid called a plait. Our core consists of an 8.5-inch metal handle and a 16-inch leather core. The first belly is going to be around 2 feet when the plaiting is completed. The overall length of the whip when it's completed will be 6 feet. So you're going to do this and each subsequent belly is going to be longer and longer, and it's going to help create the taper that a whip needs to work. So what I've done is I've cut 6 strands. I've actually cut 3 strands, but Each one is 8 feet long, and in the middle, I'm just pinching it, and that's going to be where the braiding begins, and so I count it as 2 strands. So we've got these 3 8-foot strands. I'm just going to wrap them around like that, one on top of another. These strands are not cut perfectly. Some of them have jagged edges from resizing, but we're going to be tapering these strands as the taper in the core reduces. So a lot of these strands will get cleaned up as the belly is plaited. So all you're trying to do here is get 3 strands on each side. So we've got 3 strands on the right side and 3 strands on the left side. Now, a plait is simply a braid, but it's usually done around a core. And this is a 6 plait, meaning there are 6 strands. So the way that we're going to do that is you're going to look at the 2 bottom strands, these ones here. You're going to find the one that is going over the other one. So we have these 2 strands here. This one is going over that one. We're going to pretend that there's a little arrowhead there pointing to the right side. That means we're going to work. The next strand we're going to work is the top strand on the side this is pointing at. So lowest strand is going over is this one. It's pointing to this side. We're going to take the top strand from the right side. On the left side, we're going to grab the 2 top strands, put our hand underneath those, grab the strand from the right side, pull it around. It's going to go under these 2 strands and over the remaining strand on the bottom. And we do that alternating each side. So now we're going to go under these 2 strands with our hand, reach behind the core of the whip, grab the top strand on the left side, bring it around. It's going to go under these 2, over that one. And you just do that over and over again. So what I'll do is when I'm starting a plait like this, I'm not going to pull too tight because I'm going to want to reposition these strands so that they're covering all of the handle. So once I've got it done a little bit, I'm just going to push those up a little bit just to make sure they're covering everything. Just back in the vise. And continue to plait. I'm going to do 6 plaits here, 1 full series. A series of plaits is defined as all strands having been plaited 1 time. So if it's a 6-strand plait, that's 6 actual plaits consists of a series. So once I've done a full series here, this is number 3, I'm going to add my plaiting soap, which is the lubricant that you use to allow the strands to slide against each other and lay down nice and flat. Okay, so what I'm using for my plaiting soap is Aussie Leather Conditioner. I've used this quite a bit, but if you don't have access to a Tandy, you can make your own. You just use lard and water and 1 bar of soap. But I find Aussie Leather Conditioner to be a great plaiting agent. It helps all the strands slide against each other, but more than that, it's going to infuse these strands with conditioner. These make up the center of the whip. So what you'll end up having is if you use this as your plaiting soap for each belly, you're going to have a whip that's conditioned at its core, and that conditioner over time is going to pull itself outward. So as long as you keep the outside section of the whip conditioned, the inside will keep this stuff in there and it'll never really break down due to drying out. I'm just going to get a little bit, 2 fingers, and I'm going to apply it to about 8 inches of these strands. If you apply it all the way down the strand, it's going to collect debris on the floor. And then I'm just going to plait. I'm going to do an under 2, over 1 sequence until I reach a point at which the diameter of the core has reduced so much that we have crowding like this, where the strands can't lay flat because there's too much coverage. And then we'll begin to taper on the plait, taper the strands down individually, and allow them to contour the underlying core. And when you plait, here's how you want to tighten. You're gonna reach behind, and when you pull it, before you wrap it around the front, you're gonna pull and gently lay it across the top. Pull, gently lay it across the top. And if you watch up in this area, when I tighten the strand, I'm not tightening it in this position, I'm tightening it in the last position it was plaited. So when I tighten this strand, look up in this general area and you'll see the strand up there being tightened and locked into place. So whenever you plait, you're tightening the previous plait series. So don't be concerned with it being tight here. Be concerned with it being tight in the previous series of plaits that you completed. You'll notice the tension that I'm trying to put on these is what requires the use of a leather with high tensional strength, torsional strength, whichever one it is. So like I said earlier, this is about 10 times stronger than cowhide. So in order to get the same tightness and plaiting on cowhide, I'd have to be using strands that are about double the width. And while that can make a functional whip, it can make a cruder looking whip. If you want to have a nice looking flat plait, that's symmetrical and just as appealing to the eye as well as functional, you go with thinner strands, more narrow strands, and deerskin is just a great way to do that. We've already identified all the weak spots in the strands by stretching. So while a strand may break while we're plaiting, it's unlikely that it will. And if it does, then we address it then. Our hope is that it doesn't, but this material doesn't come from a factory and it's not produced to specs. It comes from wild animals and there's variances from hide to hide. So you've got to learn to just go with the flow. If there's a breakage that's unexpected, it's not the end of the world. Most people who are looking to purchase leather goods understand that it's a natural material and that there are things that are just simply out of your control. Okay, so we have completed the first belly of this whip, and now what we're going to do is roll the whip out. We're going to smooth out any bumps, try and make it as uniform as possible. I just use a board here. I've got one side lined with duct tape just to prevent any splinters or anything from marring the surface. I'm just going to use moderate force, push down, and roll it back and forth. You should use some effort, enough to make your heart beat a little faster than normal. If you're not tired after rolling, then consider rolling a bit harder. But this is definitely a necessary step in order to prevent your aesthetic quality from being subpar. It's going to make everything look smoother and prettier. Okay, so first belly is in the vise. I'm now going to plait the second belly. To determine the lengths that you need for a particular belly, first you have to figure out how long you want that belly to be. So this belly right now is about 3 feet. We're going to do the second belly out to about 5 feet. So it's going to extend beyond this by 2 feet. And the general rule of thumb is the total length that you want to plait, each strand needs to be 1.5 times that length. So if I want this belly to be 5 feet long, I'm going to need the strands to be 7.5 feet long to get there. But the process is the same. Just grab one of them, and you're just going to cross it over like that. Grab the other, the next one in your hand. The part that is on the back of the whip handle there is the exact center of these long strands. Now these ones have knots tied in them. That's just because I didn't have strands long enough by themselves, so it's just 2 strands of equal length. These are going to be the shorter strands in this belly, so I will drop these strands into the center of the whip to help aid in the shaping of the whip's taper. They will not go the full 5 feet. So if you notice, I'm not starting this at the end of the handle. I just start it so that it's sitting on the vise, letting the vise sort of support these strands. But now once they're all there, I'm just gonna sort of pick them all up and move them up. This can look dirty and messy. It's not much of a problem because it's all gonna get covered, flattened out when you roll, or cut off if it's hanging off the edge. Okay, so now we're working a 10 plait, which means we have 10 strands and 5 on each side. Ideally, what you want to do is plait and be weaving a strand in between half of the strands on the other side. So if you have an even number, if you had 6 strands, you would go under 3, over 3. But we're dealing with 5 strands, an odd number, so we're gonna do under 3, over 2. But you wanna get as close as you can to cutting it in half. Cutting in half the number of strands on each side. So we're gonna go under these 3 here, over those 2. You just grab the top strand from the right side, bring it around, and do the exact same thing with the other side. I'm gonna go under these 3, over those 2. You just go from one side to the next, repeating the exact same action, under 3, over 2. And we'll do that until we get to one of the short strands, and it's time to drop that strand, or until all the strands crowd up, and it's time to taper them. And again, once I've got a full series of these done like this, I'm gonna add plaiting soap. I'm gonna move all this plaiting up to the end of the handle, and everything will begin to look smoother and prettier. And once I've got enough done, I can put the already plaited section in the vise, and then I'll be plaiting below the vise. Right now I'm plaiting above the vise, and that can create problems where things get in the way, but it's temporary. And I'd say after 2 or 3 more strands, I can confidently move this to the bottom of the vise and free up the strands from getting tangled in clamps or vise apparatus. So I'm just going to tighten all these here, make sure we're secure. Now I'm going to move this so that this is in the vise, and we'll be plaiting below the vise. Get some plaiting soap, or in this case, Tandy Leather conditioner. Once I have the first belly on, I like to grease up that belly, just so as the strands move across it, there's no resistance from it. And again, we go right back to the under 3, over 2 pattern. This is how I'll bolster, and the primary reason I'm going to bolster this is because I do want to smoothen out this transition. It does have kind of a sudden drop there, and I prefer to have my transitions be very gradual and almost unnoticeable. So I'm going to add this leather, which I've just resized by binding around and smoothing out that transition and adding a bit more mass to the thong of the whip. And when I do this, the main goal I've got here is to sort of add this seamlessly and without interrupting too much of the profile of the whip. So I'm just going to bind this edge to edge. Try and get it nice and tight each time I bind it. So this will do two things. It's going to add some mass to the portion of the thong near the handle, which will allow the whip to move a bit better when it's done, and it's going to act to stiffen up the whip here at the transition, which will prevent it from being loose and noodly. And with deerskin, you can always tell if you're getting it nice and tight, because it'll develop a shine, a sheen. Deerskin will, if it's not tight, you'll be able to see a wrinkle in the grain. Once you get it tight, you can see it. It looks as though it's got, you know, light coating of shellac, but it doesn't. It's just a good indicator as to whether or not you've put tension in the strand. All right, so I'm gonna do a couple more wraps, but I want to make it so that when I've reached the end of the strand, there isn't a sudden decrease. So just get a piece of scrap leather from when you were trimming the hide, wrapped around your finger. And then you're just gonna grab a safety beveler like this and sort of put some tension on the strand, and just sort of, you know, don't do a super deep skive with this. First, sort of gauge how deep you can cut without cutting the strand. There we go. You just want to try and decrease the width or the thickness of the deerskin gradually, so that by the time you get to the end of the strand, you're working with a paper thin piece that will pretty much match the profile of the thong. You can see the profile of the strand that we're using to bind sort of matches up now because we split that down. I'm going to keep tension on that strand, get some artificial sinew, and just bind this on so that it doesn't come undone. Don't bind too tight with this unless you're going to be doing an edge-to-edge binding for a portion of the whip. Otherwise, you will create a bump. The sinew will deform the top layer of your plaiting. All right, so in order to cut strands for the overlay, we need to ensure that we're cutting strands that are long enough that will reach the total length we need, which is 6 feet, and that they're wide enough to cover the core here without leaving any gaps. So the easiest way to do this is to do a Christmas tree diagram, what I call a Christmas tree diagram. So I'm going to pretend that I'm looking at the thong like this, and I'm just going to represent that with black line down the middle of the paper. The overlay on it's going to be 12 strands, so that means we're going to have 6 coming off of each side. So that would be the left side. That's the right side. So to get to 6 feet long, you need strands that are 6 times 1.5. So that means you need a 9-foot long strand when plaited will reach 6 feet. We want the the end of the whip to be in what is called a 6-point fall hitch, meaning there will be 6 strands at the very end of the whip. So 6 strands need to be 9 feet long. So that'll be this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. These are going to be the 6 strands that go all the way to the end of the whip. And then the remaining 3 strands will drop along the way, meaning as the taper of the whip gets greater and greater, the total coverage needed decreases, and so we'll drop the strands into the core of the whip and plait over them. So I like to do 1 at the halfway mark. So if we want to go 6 feet, that would be at 3 feet will be where we're going to drop the first set of strands. So those strands, we need to be 3 times 1.5, which is 4.5. So the first strands that we drop will be 4.5 feet long each. And then I'd just like to do 1.5 feet for the remaining 2. Add 1.5 feet to it. So this will be 6 feet and this will be 7.5. So that means I need 2 4.5s, 2 6, 2 7.5, and 6 9-foot strands. I've cut and stretched these strands. I'm going to cut additional strands. Here's more that I've cut, and I'm going to stretch and resize those as well, and then we'll size them out based on this Christmas tree diagram. So once you've stranded and you've got a big pile of strands, you want to be able to manage these and not have knots form. So the best way that I know to do that is to take the strand, one end, and just hold it with your thumb, and then you're just going to alternate between your thumb and your pinky doing a figure 8. And you're going to do that for the entire strand. You don't have to do it tight. Doing it this way allows you to really compact the strands in a hank that won't come undone unless you start pulling on one end to have it come undone. And when you do pull on that end, you can pull on that end and you're just pulling from the inside of the hank. The whole hank doesn't come undone, and it won't knot itself up while you're pulling it from the hank. So that's the best way to manage these once you've stranded them all. Okay, we've got all the strands cut and resized for our overlay. We're going to start plaiting them on the core. And the way that we're going to do that is this. We're going to take this strand here. So these are our 2 4.5-foot strands. I'm just going to put them behind the handle of the core like that and have them draped over the front of the vise, so I can see them and clearly identify them as the left and right side of that strand. Now, I'm going to take one of the strands. So this is a 9-foot strand, so it's actually an 18-foot strand that I have folded in the middle to make up 2 9-foot strands. So here's the center of that. So I've got 9 feet on each side. I'm going to take the center, I'm going to put it here up in the front of the handle of the whip, and it is going over this side of the 4.5-foot strand that's in the center, and I'm going to have it go under that side. I'm going to take each one of these strands and I'm going to replicate that, but I'm going to alternate what side is going over and what side is going under. So the second strand that I put up there is going to go under the left side, since the first strand went over, and it's going to go over the right side. I'll just do that with all the remaining 5 strands. All right, so now all 6 strands have been interwoven into that center strand. And now what we're going to do is we're going to start on the left side and take the top one on the left side. As you can see, it's going over this strand here. So now we're going to alternate. We're going to do an over-under pattern as we bring it down towards the front. So we're going to go under this one, over that, under this one, over that, under this one. I'm going to grab this and I'm just going to bring it down towards the front. Do the same thing with the other side. I'm going to look at this top strand. It is going under this strand, so that means it's going to go over this one. It'll go under this one. over that one, under this one, over this one, and under that one in the front. So I'm gonna grab it, it's the top strand, I'm gonna bring it down front, and I'm gonna have it go under that one. I'm gonna repeat that for both sides. So now we're just doing a basic over-under diamond plait. We're gonna do the diamond plait for the entire length of the handle, which is just over 8 inches. So when I say over-under, here's what we're talking about. When we're doing basic plaiting, again, it's just like doing a herringbone. You look at the 2 lowest strands, that would be these 2 here, and you find the one going over the other one. So that's one on the right side is going over the one on the left. And pretend like there's an arrowhead at the top of that pointing to the left side. That means we're gonna be pulling a strand from the left side, and it will be interwoven with strands on the right. So what I'll always do is, whether it's a herringbone or diamond plait, the lowest strand going over will always be a strand that will be under the strand you're gonna be working. So I just leave that against the thong, I pull this. It's gonna go under this one, over that, under this one, over that, under this one, over that. Going under 3 and over 4. And then I reach back, I grab the top one on the left side, just like we do with herringbone. Bring it around front. Okay, so we've done diamond plaiting on the first 8 inches. That's covering the handle. Now we're gonna transition into herringbone. And the way that we're gonna do that is, we're gonna go these first 3 strands, and hold against the thong of the whip. And then the remaining 4, we're gonna do an over one, under one. So we'll have over these 3, under that, over this, under that, over that. Grab a strand from the right side, top strand, pull it through. And do the same thing on the right side. Over these 3, under, over, under, over. Pull from the top strand on the left side. We're gonna do that again on each side. So you're just gonna do that one operation twice on each side. And once we've done it twice on both sides, now we're just going to go into an under 3, over 4 pattern for our herringbone. And that is the plaiting pattern we're going to use for the remainder of the whip. And so, under 3, over 4 is pretty simple. We're going to go over 4, so the first 4 here, we're going to hold those against the thong. The remaining 3, we're going to go under those. It's much faster than diamond plait. And we'll continue this until we get to the first drop strand. Okay, so we're 3 feet into the thong, about the midway point. Here are the 4.5 foot long strands. They're too short to continue to plait, and it's time that we drop them. So this is how we drop them. Currently on the left side, we're doing an under 3, over 4 plaiting pattern. And on the right side, we're doing an under 4, over 3. That allows us to have a proportional or a symmetrical plait. The plait count or the plait pattern on the front will be the same as on the back. So we want to drop from the bottom in both of these cases. Now what I mean by the bottom is we have these 2 short strands, they're the ones we're dropping, and they're at the bottom of the stack of strands. Sometimes you will drop from the top, but in this case we are going to drop from the bottom. Well, actually we're going to drop the one on the right side from the left side is going to drop from the bottom, the right side is going to drop from the top. So here's how we do that. Right side, we're pulling that going under 3, over 4. Left side, we're going to go under 4, over 3. Now we're going to take the one on the left side and just curl it around the back and pretend like it's not there. Continue to plait it. Now we're going to do under 3 over 3 because we're pretending like that short one isn't there anymore. And on the right side, we're going to continue to do under 4 over 3 until this strand is in the top position, and then we'll drop it up there, and I'll show how that's done. Just keep your eye on this one as I plait over it. It will get incorporated into the core of the whip. And we'll do the same operation each time we need to drop a strand. It's best to try to drop strands from both sides at the same time to prevent skipped plaits. Now, if you'll notice on the left side, we've seamlessly dropped this one into the core. There's no real indication that we're now working with 6 instead of 7. There's not a noticeable change in the plaiting pattern on that side, and we want to do the same on the other side, and we're almost in the proper position to do that. Okay, so dropping this from the top, what we're going to do is, instead of going under 3 over 3 like we've been doing, we're going to go under everything. Wrap it around the front and imagine that as a skipped plait. So instead of alternating now and going to the left side again, we're just going to plait again from the right side once, go under 3 over 3. We're now going to take the first strand that we dropped, and if you'll notice, these 3 strands, this one here, and that one there, you notice that one's sticking out. And that's because that's the drop strand. We haven't tightened it since we dropped it, but we're going to do that now. And you want to do this very gently. If you pull it too hard, take that strand and pull it straight down at an angle, as opposed to being at an angle, it'll just be pointing straight down. And you'll have to unplait everything and redo it. And now we're going to do a full series of plaits, which will be 12 plaits. And then this strand, where it's sitting up here, will exhibit the same behavior. It will stick out from the strand in front and behind it, and so we'll pull that tight only once we see that. And then we'll continue to plait in an over 3, under 3, or an under 3 over 3 pattern until we reach the next dropping point, which should be in about a foot or so. Okay, so we've got 6 feet of the thong plaited. Now we're going to make the fall for the whip. The fall is what attaches to the end of the whip. This is a replaceable part of the whip. It's what takes the most abuse when you're cracking a whip. And if that abuse was absorbed by the plaited section of the thong, it would eventually wear out and not be usable anymore. So a fall is used because this is something we can replace on the whip as it wears down over time. Usually I'm going to set my strander to about 6 or 7 millimeters. And I'm going to get, this is like a 3/4 ounce latigo. You want to get, a good 3-foot long section. And the way that I cut them is I'll just feed it into my strander at about 6 or 7 millimeters. And every couple of inches, I'm going to drop it down just a spin of the wheel. You want the fall to taper a bit. Next, I'm going to get this is just a regular wood chisel, and I'm just going to put the chisel about a 3/4 of an inch down from the top, right in the middle of the fall. I'm just going to pound it through to make that eye. Open that up. We're going to just slip that around a hook. I use a safety beveler with a nice fresh blade in it, and I'm just going to run this down the corners We want to take this from being a squared cross section to a more rounded cross section. And so this is the first step in doing this. Make sure this is the first thing you do if you're going to do it this way, because the second step is getting this wet so that we can round it out with friction, and it can be very difficult to cut these corners off when the hide is wet. So now we've got some beveled edges there. We're going to soak this in water. This doesn't need to be soaked the same way as if you're going to be tooling leather. You just want to get it wet more for burnishing purposes than anything else. And then you're going to just put it around the hook again. And you want to get a strand of leather. And what you're going to do is wrap it around your fall once and hold the narrow end nice and tight. And you're just going to move it back and forth. Use friction and the water to burnish the edges. This is going to round out the fall, stretch it out a little bit. Now you can see it's a bit more rounded out and pretty looking. And I just follow that up with just coat it in our Aussie leather conditioner. And I'm just going to give it a couple more passes. This will heat up the latigo and it will absorb the leather conditioner deeper into the fall than if you were just to slather it on. And once you've done that, you can just get a pair of scissors and gently and carefully just round out the corners at the top. And now we're going to attach it to the whip. Okay, so our thong has been plaited to 6 feet, just a bit over 6 feet. We've got 6 strands remaining, so that this will be what's called a 6-point hitch, meaning 6 strands are going to be tied in the hitch to keep the fall on the whip. So we're going to take the fall, which we have greased up, rounded out, and we're just going to slip it onto the thong through the eye. I usually do that just by taking like the left side, folding it over. Notice we put a taper into the fall, so you're going to take one of the thinner sections, or the section thinner than the very top part of the fall, somewhere around midway down. You're just going to hold it behind the thong of the whip with your forefinger. So here's our first round. What we're going to do, holding with our left hand and our left forefinger, we're going to hold the fall against the thong of the whip. We're going to take the top strand on the right, tighten it up, and push it around the back. Do a half wrap. Then you're going to take and pull it through like this so that you've got a nice loop formed. You're going to reach through the loop from the top, grab it and pull it back through the loop. And then just gently pull it, keep it nice looking, and pull towards the vise, and then bring it around the front and let it hang. We're going to do that for each strand. So now, second on the right side, same thing, pop it around back, reach through the loop, nice and gentle pull towards the top of the vise, tighten it, lay it around front, let it hang. Third strand on the right side, tighten it, pop around back, reach through from the top, grab the strand, pull it through, hitch it, pull it towards the vise, drape it across the front. Now we're going to take the left side, since we're done with all the ones on the right side. You can tighten all these at the same time or before you hitch any of them. There's already sufficient tension in those to keep them from coming loose. And then I usually grab the bottom one. I'll go from the bottom to the top on the left side, and it's the same. Pop it around back, reach through from the top, do the half hitch, pull it towards the vise, drape it across the front. The second one. Pop it around back, create the loop, come from the top of the loop, hitch it nice and gently, keep it looking nice, pull it towards the vise, drape it around the front. And now with our final one, same thing. Drape it around the front. Now we want to find the first one we did, which is the one that has a knot in it, and we're going to hitch that. This is our locking hitch. So first, what you want to do before you hitch it is pull it nice and tight, so you can ensure that that first hitch you did is tightened up. And do the same thing, just a regular hitch action, except now, once you've pulled it towards the vise, you get the knot out of there. I'm going to cut a little taper into the end of this strand. You're going to stick it through the eye of the fall. When we pull the fall through, it's going to lock this locking hitch in place. Now, just want to get a good grip on the thong and on the end of the fall, and you're just going to pull the fall all the way down and get it as tight against the hitches as you can. We've just tightened up the hitches even more because the fall increases in diameter as you get closer to the top, so this has forced the hitches, which were sized to a narrower section of the fall, to now fit around a wider section, so they're naturally tightened, but I still give them all one final tug. Get about an inch, leave about an inch on each strand. And we are done with the thong of the whip. We have the fall attached. All that's required now is rolling the thong out, make it nice and flat, look for any errors that we can potentially fix, and now to add knots to the heel and the transition. Okay, so now we're going to do the heel knot first. A heel knot is attached at the heel of the whip right here, and it's what you hold on to when you crack the whip. You want to get a good foundation built for the heel knot, and typically the way that I do that is I'll just get a piece of scrap leather. Cut a strip about that long. And I'm just going to do a test wrap around here to see how much I'm going to need to cover this once. So right around there, I'm just going to mark where the first wrap ends. And now I'm just going to cut a sort of a long taper from the end to that mark. I'm going to get some sinew here, maybe 4 feet worth of sinew. And I'm just going to tightly wrap the end of this. This is the beginning of our foundation for our heel knot. You want to try to lock the overlay down onto the core as much as possible, and so a nice tight wrapping with sinew is a good basis for that. Then I just will use a stapler, 1/2-inch staples. I'm just going to lock these in place. If they hit the core, they won't go in, so sometimes you have to do it at an angle. I just want to lock these strands, or now I'm just going to just try to flatten that a bit. Now, get your safety beveler, just thin this out a little bit. If it's super thick, you want it to be around a 2-3 ounce. And once that's done, you're just going to take the thicker end and staple it down. You're going to wrap it around. Once you've got a full wrap once, staple it down again. And now you've got this decreasing, we've tapered this strand, this strip here, so as it goes around, it will start to create sort of a ball shape. One last staple. Now you'll have these steps in there, so I'll just take my safety beveler and run it around the edge real quick just to round it out. Make it look a bit prettier. So if you end up putting your foundation too high up, you can see the metal of our core there, you just want to make this space, as close to the width as the rest of the heel knot foundation. And we're going to do that just by adding another piece of leather here. Okay, so we finished off our heel knot with a two-tone pineapple knot. Went ahead and put a 5x4 Turk's head at the transition, attached a cracker to the end of the fall, and now we're gonna take it outside, do some test cracks with it, and see what kind of damage it can do.